last session from this most wonderful conference is Chuck Swedrock doing Embrace the Mystery. You'll know Chuck because he's the man behind the scenes. He has done amazing things at this conference and many more. And if my recollection serves me, this is your last full day on the board of directors.
Well, through the end of the year, actually.
All right. So,
close enough.
We would love for you all to give Chuck a big hand, please.
Thank you. Actually, at this stage, for my sanity, I'm going to say let's take a moment and connect. And I think the most significant way to connect is the breath. Take some deep breaths in whatever way is comfortable for you. We got a song that plays here for a couple of minutes. Sound level is all right. Just a chance to unwind, become present. You can contemplate how long it took me to make all those dots, you know, to fill in. One day at a time. Oh, thank you. I needed that. Sort of by self-examination, take this statement, without ignorance there is no discovery. Seems fairly simple at first, but there's a lot of depth to it. If you round the corner and you don't know what's there, you can have a surprise. If you always know what's there, it's not going to be the same experience. So it's really saying, you know, these questions we carry around, where did I come from? Why am I here? What is life? What is my purpose? What was I sent back for? Who am I really? And this morning we heard the question phrased, who are we? What is this design, the system that we find ourselves in? And the major proposition of this talk is it's designed to include ignorance. This is the experience of unveiling and uncovering, and that's to be embraced. It's a part of us. There's another way to look at it too. There's a larger dimension to what is this system? Well, we get stuck in an anthropomorphic viewpoint. You want more volume? Is that, okay, I will try. So, there's also all of that system that's around us that guides us through us. And there's a certain language that goes through that, or from that, from various religious perspectives, which would use the vocabulary of, say, angel. For my purposes, a little one time on this academic side of the question, whether it's angel or spirit guide or God, higher self, there's this external agency. And I'm going to share with you next something from my experience, which is kind of in the many experiences that are part of my life. This one is just one of those things that brought me right up front to the awareness of this external agency, which is nameless, but is very visible. In a former life, former part of my life, not a past life, in the early 90s, I joined this church. It was with a second marriage. I had 2 stepchildren, 2 of my own daughters, in the ages of preteen to teen years. And I had been going to a Unity church, which I had moved to after my divorce and felt very spiritually at home. But it was too small to have any kind of youth group. So we were looking for a church that could fill the needs of young people, because that I felt was very important. So this is courtesy of Google and their street map. I can take you through this little experience. When I arrived at that church from Unity, one of the things was that we fell in love with the youth pastor. He was ideal, and we really felt at home with that. And while I felt like I was giving up some of my connection to spirit from the Unity church, and actually for a while I actually went to one church on one Sunday and another church on another Sunday, but that wore out. Well, at about 6 months he left and he went off to plant another church, as the vernacular they use. But we were then ingrained in this church. And becoming a member of the church, you had to sign this statement. And I'd look down the elements of this doctrinal statement, and there was just something about it I could not bring myself to agree to. So I'd say, I can't do that. Well, I asked if I could help in the youth group. Could I be, one of the parent helpers? And then he said, well, sure, I signed this statement. Oh, okay, well, maybe there's something else I can do. So, well, nursery, I can volunteer in the nursery during the service and working with toddlers. That was very heartwarming. I loved that. Well, eventually, as things changed in the church, they came to the idea they wanted to do flannel board lessons with the youth, and hey, would you sign this piece of paper? Oh, well, that ended that. Well, one thing you can do in a church that isn't theologically challenging is be an usher. You can say, here's your bulletin. You can show people their seats, And I'm being a very responsible, I got to serve kind of guy. I worked my way up to head usher in the 8:30 a.m. service, which, there wasn't a lot of demand. But, so that's my position, my role, and I have this compulsion to do it well. So this sanctuary seats about 750 people. The church membership's about 1,000, and they have about 3,000 in their general attendance. A big church. The Sunday morning, 8:30 service, probably 350. Okay, here, courtesy of Google, is the map from my home. I'm reaching for my red highlighter so I can point it out to you with a laser. I don't know if you probably can't make that out very well. Well, A is home. And does this work? Technology has been my challenge all weekend. Well, good. That's a 12-mile path. Okay, there you go. Up there's home. This leg is about exactly 6 miles, a little over 6.5 miles. This is 5.3 miles. And the meaning of that was this Sunday morning, one Sunday morning, when 4 teens weren't exactly cooperating to get out the door in time for me to be at my job at the church, I said, when they're ready, you come, I gotta go. So I left. I'm late. I gotta be responsible. So I leave, heading out of the development, out onto Salt Road, which is the 6-mile stretch. This is leaving the development. It's before 8 o'clock Sunday morning. There's no traffic on the road. I have this all to myself. Let me catch up with my slides here. And so I come out and turn right. Okay, here's a symbol. No traffic. I can make up a few minutes with the accelerator. I'm sure I was going 15, maybe more, over the speed limit. But not right away, I mean, as I'm accelerating. I go down at about the 3/4 mile mark. There's a golf course. It's fairly open on both sides except for the parking lot and the buildings. As I approach the buildings, I'm totally focused on where I have to be when, from my left, a configuration of birds, maybe 4 or 5 sparrow in size, are in my attention and coming across the path of my vehicle, and I have to jump on the brakes to avoid hitting the birds. They pass, the road is open, I accelerate again. I go down to about the 2-mile mark, and the same pattern repeats itself. I jump on the brakes, slow down, they pass, I speed back up. I'm down to about the Xerox plant area on one side and the open fields on the left. I'm proceeding. There's another symbol there. Just suggestion. I wasn't paying any attention to the form of the structure of this system, obviously. I go a little bit further, and whoops, I'm going backwards, sorry. And the same thing happened again. Well, not wanting to be accused of being too quick on the uptake, I ponder it. Now, this has been about 3 miles of my mental marker on this trip. It happened for certain 3 times, and I'm thinking another, possibly a 4th between C and D. But I wasn't really logging it, but I was certainly becoming aware of it. So I had this sort of ignominious thought, well, maybe I should go the speed limit. I mean, it registered that much. So I crossed the 104 expressway here, went beyond it, and I do for the next couple of miles the speed limit. I'm not really paying a lot of attention to it, but I'm now at a point which is about 6 miles down, just less than a mile now down to where I make the turn. And it's cornfields. There's a 1/4 mile between houses or more. This is open country farmland, still posted 45, yes, but when I decide to speed up, this happens. And if there'd been a camera in the car taking a picture of the driver, perhaps I could have matched this expression. So this is an aerial view, satellite view, thank you Google. This is open country. There's nothing around, but the birds appeared. Yeah, this is all the incidents, so at least 4 times and perhaps 5. I come up to the intersection. I have now slowed way down. I'm way below the speed limit. I'm trying to figure out what's happened here. I looked to the left, I looked to the right. I'm very slowly pulling out onto Atlantic Avenue, now making the western leg of my journey. I get down the road a little ways, less than a mile, and as I'm approaching this area right here, thank you Google, I notice something up ahead and I slow down more. I'm becoming aware, time is slowing down. I realize there's a car off to the right, and it is overturned in the yard to the right. I become aware that I've become aware of two vehicles that have already pulled over, and occupants are getting out of their cars. As I get a little closer, I'm aware of a person, I believe a woman, coming out of the house from the yard next to the overturned vehicle. And going through my mind is I'm not first responder trained. At that time, I wasn't about to give into that fad of carrying around cell phones. I was still at the pager age for my job. I decide there really wasn't anything I was going to contribute to this, and I was trying to figure it out. So I pulled over slowly into the left lane and went by with, again, one more symbolic reminder that two of us should have been paying more attention to this. At this stage, I go slowly to church. I have very little recollection of the rest of that mileage, another 4 or some miles getting to church and what happened. But I'm thinking, what just happened? I cannot explain this as coincidence. Believe it or not, I have told some folks this who say, well, you've got a great imagination. And I guess that's the way they have to deal with things that they can't relate to. But that wasn't going to work for me. I knew there was something more to this. What agency is involved? Like I say, if you want to call it angels or higher self or divine synchronicity, I knew this was not something that I could explain, but it was real. Then it begins to go on, well, why should I be protected from my foolish behavior? I mean, a little bit of survivor guilt, perhaps. And what's the explanation for it? What's the purpose? And just pondering something that has no answers. Another recognition a little further down the road in the days, in the time that followed, was the behavior of the birds had to be organized with anticipation of a future event. This was precognitive, not on my part, but on the agency and knowing the trajectory and the outcome if there wasn't an alteration in my behavior. And no matter how much I thought about it, all I could have was the memories of it. So in the end, while it's clearly an event I have to assimilate into my life and absorb and move forward with, there's still plenty of mystery. Finally. I also concluded that this agency had a larger perspective. It knew enough about me to realize they cared about the value of birds enough not to ignore them. I see a bug splatter on the windshield and I think about the life involved. So my sense is that there's an intelligence surrounding me that knows me better than I know myself, and certainly knows my environment. I want to go on now to another example, a similar situation. A few years later, I ran into this book, The Evolution Angel by Dr. Michael Abrams, which is a pen name. His name is really R. Todd Michael. He's an emergency room physician and wrote this book after having interactions with deceased individuals from his emergency room, and not so much that as the angels, as he calls them, he labels them, that are there surrounding the events that happen in those times. This goes back to a time before he was a doctor, before he even decided to become a doctor. I'd like to read it for you. A line of towering thunderheads flickered in and out of view with each stroke of lightning. The road was covered with a treacherous sheen of water. It was nearly 4 in the morning, and I had no business driving this late. Making matters worse, I had worked all night and I was dead tired, but I kept going. More than anything, I wanted to make it home. In my fatigue, I had neglected to fasten my seatbelt. The miles rolled by in the darkness and the rain poured down in sheets. My head began to nod, but over and over I wrenched my attention back to the road. I struggled to stay awake, trying every trick I knew. I slapped myself on the cheeks. I shook my head. I sang. I chewed gum, and I kept going. Soon my mind began to drift, and a parade of captivating images floated before me. I saw myself swinging back and forth on the swing set at my old grade school, back and forth, back and forth. And then I was gliding down deeper and deeper into the well of memory, falling effortlessly, drinking in the feeling of deep relaxation that comes only with deep sleep. The next thing I knew, a pair of soft hands grasped my face and pulled my head up sharply. A loud voice, kind but very firm, exploded in my head. "Wake up, Michael, now." My eyes flew open and adrenaline surged through my solar plexus. Like a powerful electric shock, the car was hurtling directly toward a massive bridge abutment only 50 feet before me, the speedometer hovering near 80. In a heartbeat, I wrenched the wheel to the left, and a split second later, the concrete pillar flashed by my right window. I pulled over to the side of the road, shaking and gasping for breath. Physically and emotionally exhausted, I soon fell into a troubled sleep. Like the image of the deadly bridge abutment flashing past my window, images of my life began to race by in rapid succession. He then has a life review. I saw myself groping in the dark, feeling my way through blind alleys and dead-end pathways, one after another. And then there was nothing. The next thing I knew, sunlight was pouring over the dashboard. Okay, I guess I don't have to clarify, there was no one in the car with him. He's alone in his vehicle, yet he says, soft hands grasped his head and pulled him up. So this agency became involved directly. And then very interesting observation is native language message. This was not telepathic. He heard in his native language, "Wake up now, Michael." And I've had a couple in my life, those instances where there's a voice and it's not external necessarily audibly, but it certainly feels as though it was. And it has a very short message and it captures your attention. So in my case, it took a while for this to evolve. In his situation, obviously, there was an urgency to it. These don't go away because grabbing my attention, in his case, it caused him to go into a reflective period. He lost all of his belongings. He lost his job. He lost a relationship following this. He was living in a friend's basement because his cabin had burned down after his insurance had expired. It was one of those very transformative, pivotal times in life. sort of rudderless. He describes having a dream one night. He wakes up with the realization that he wants to go back to school to get the training necessary to be to enroll in medical school. He's 29 at the time. He tells his friends and his family, and they all think, yeah, sure. Of course, knowing the end of the story, this change happened. He did make it through that, at doubling up on the courses at times to get through in a shorter period of time, and indeed became an emergency physician. The mystery still lingers. One of the events he had at his internship as it was closing was his mentor physically had a terminal illness. I forget the diagnosis, probably a cancer. And as that individual passed away, he began to receive messages from the doctor that had just passed over. And then this angel spoke to him again. And his line in the book is, "Now I hear angels all the time." So that was the transformation for him. I was supposed to be able to invite up here now someone to share their experience, someone who is involved with Experiencers Retreat in St. Louis, the organizer of that retreat. She was going to share a portion of her experiences, but she's given me permission to describe them to you. This is Linda Jacqueline. Many of you should know her. She organizes the retreat for experiencers. It's gone on how many years now? Fifth year. And they've programmed the dates out for the next several years. So if you go out to their website, we do have a link to their website from the IANDS website. If you're an experiencer, you can consider putting that on your schedule. She's an angel among us. Anyhow, Linda had a near-death experience when she was 4 years old. She drowned. She was playing next to a creek. She fell in. The current pulled her under the bank. She was rescued. As they tell the experience later by her family, and some unidentified man came onto the scene and participated in reviving her from that. She grew up with the only memories from the experience. She's just over 4 years, 4.5 years old at that time. But she would occasionally have flashes of memory of blonde hair floating on the water, but she had no recollection of her near-death experience. She was able to retrieve the full memory of her childhood NDE when she had an adult NDE, which was triggered by some drugs during surgery. In her adult NDE, and she relives or recovers the memory of the childhood NDE, she sees more of the experience and knows that as she went into the light, there were loving beings there, including a grandmother, and they're telling her that she's a child, seeing the bright, sparkly lights in this 4-year-old experience, and they're saying you should go back. And she said no. She was not interested. This was too much, too nice. And in the ensuing interaction between the beings around her and this decision to come back, they show her a picture of the scene of where they're reviving her body. And over to the side, sitting next to a tree, is her brother, her older brother. And she realizes that if she doesn't go back, he's going to be in a lot of trouble because he was supposed to be watching her. And so she agrees to come back. And then in her adult NDE, it's explained to her that she was not allowed to remember that, because if she had remembered the experience of deciding to come back for him, it would have affected their relationship growing up. And the only reason that she can now have that memory is because this brother had transitioned prior to her adult NDE. So now she was allowed to have the memory. I don't know about you, but I think that there's this sort of continuing theme if you listen to Kim Sharp's NDE, and there are books out there that talk about angel stories. There seems to be this stranger somehow comes on the scene, performs some intervention, and then disappears. What struck me about her description was that the memory was inhibited while she was growing up, except for the flashes of blonde hair. And then at some point later, she's allowed to have the memory. So these interventions reflect an overall perspective, this higher intelligence, and it's not just us, but our interaction with others, and the decisions are made are obviously taking that grander perspective. I want to read one more selection here from the Evolution Angel. The question is, how do angels produce effects on the material plane? So as Dr. Abram has gone on over the years, getting more and more familiar with having these angel dialogues after a patient has expired in his care, and often it's to tell him that he's not to take this personally. But he is allowed, occasionally he asks these questions, wanting a grander view of what's happening and why is this going on. So one of his questions is, how do angels produce effects on the material plane? And here is the answer. Well, actually, he refers to a previous example, which, how are we doing with time?
You've got
20. I will go back to the previous one. They refer to, remember the example you were given. And here's that example. Actually, and the question he had asked that first time was, are you actually visible while you're doing your job, or are you just so unobtrusive we don't notice you? The answer from the angel he recorded was, actually you are seeing us all the time, but you are seldom aware that you are observing us. Most of you wouldn't recognize one of us if we hit you on the nose. For example, we could manifest as a mosquito buzzing around your head at just the right moment. As you pause to swat this apparently annoying insect, the chain of events that follows, your personal web of cause and effect is altered slightly, but very precisely. An hour or a day later, a traffic accident is narrowly averted. A chance encounter with an important person takes place, or you arrive at home just in time to receive a crucial phone call. So that sense of overall cause and effect, and the realization that the web that is interacting here, this agency, is future, past oriented. It is larger than we can imagine. The effect of a mosquito changing the outcome of an event. So here again, when he asks the questions, how do angels produce effects? They say, remember the example you were given? An angel becomes a cloud in the sunset, and a person stops for a moment to admire it. This pause results in a chain reaction of precisely calculated events. Do you remember that? Yes. That's how we do things. What I didn't mention, however, is that we rarely become a real physical cloud. We could do that, certainly. An extension of God can do anything. We could become a physical cloud made of real water vapor and then quietly fade away. No one would notice anything peculiar. But in general, we prefer more elegant solutions. Because we are one with your thoughts and God's thoughts, at the deepest level, we work most often at the level of some subconscious thought. In this example, we could become the perception of a cloud, a mental image in the subject's mind. This image will have precisely the same effect as a physical cloud. Either way, the person we are working with will pause for a moment and her web of cause and effect will be suitably altered. Is that what you do when you materialize? As we say, a winged being surrounded by light? Laughter from the angels. Yes, although we consider it a bit silly, sometimes we form an impression in a person's field of perception that mimics one of the classical stereotypes. So I think about what happens in a near-death experience in a person's mind when they see their field of reference, their structure. Rarely, in a carefully selected situations, we find it effective and permissible to appear in a way that matches a person's expectations. Most people expect us to appear with wings and so forth, so we give them what they want. So Dr. Abram chuckles and says, so you don't have wings? Laughter. Does God have a long white beard and sit on a throne? So that was their response. I feel like that, you know. So when is a thought mine? And when is it planted? When is a cloud there and when is it not? So we're operating, our experiences are always from a basis of perception. And can we even tell the difference? The way the system is designed, no, we can't. The focus of being human, these are my reflections, is that the experience of being human and not the origination of the phenomena is what's magic about being here. And one other area in the book, he talks about how the question was whether or not angels incarnate. And he's saying that angels and others, whatever, are lined up waiting for the experience of being human. It's like it's a real gift. So I think what we've heard a lot about at this conference is that question of increasing awareness, increasing potential, taking what we have here and expanding our field of view. And often, if we can submerge the anthropomorphic reaction to an event, it's not about me. There's a larger system here. What's the time? How much time we got again? 15. All right. As an example of that larger perspective, I'd like to share another experience of mine. Sometime later, after the birds, probably a year, this very small church that I grew up in Merle, Pennsylvania, was without a pastor. And I'm a layperson, and I agreed that I would go down and be their fill-in for a service. And now this is a very traditional, Bible-oriented environment, the one I grew out of. And so I'm somewhat really wrestling with how much do I reveal of my current involvement. I'm, a member of IANDS after all. That might not play all that well back in that arena. The church had kind of gone downhill over time, but probably on a good Sunday there's 25 to 40 people. So I arranged how I was going to do this, had a sermon plan, and the pastor is also responsible for the adult Sunday school class, so I knew I had to do two plans. As I'm driving down now, it's a 4-hour drive from my home in Rochester, New York to this rural location, and I'm on Route 90, which is a interstate I'm not speeding, but I am involved in my thoughts. And I'm playing what at the large church they call praise music, if you're familiar with that. It's very uplifting, very worship oriented, and it's just very high energy music. They have very good musical program and the best quality and fidelity of stuff. And so I think of, as part of the service in the rural church, well, I just go in to see if they have a CD player and we can use this music as part of the service. And I have one of the CDs in the car playing. And at about this time, it's dusk, and the headlights are on. There's this flash of an image in front of my vehicle, and then this very sickening thud. And I know that some fairly medium to large size animal has been killed. And then I slow down, I turn off the music, I'm totally deflated because I was at a very emotional high thinking about how this all was going to pan out in the, this was Saturday, on Sunday morning. And I knew enough from the birds incidents, I couldn't just ignore that this was something intended for my attention. But I was very depressed. I just felt like everything I was doing was in question here. And a few miles down the road, a thought just came to me which said, it's not about you. That's all it was. It wasn't a voice, but it was just this idea. So I got to the point where I was going to spend my night at a motel, and I just tried to relax and meditate, and this was in, I think, April or May in that area. And when I woke up Sunday morning, there was snow on the ground. I said, oh good, nobody will show up. And so I went on to the church. They had adult Sunday school classes held before the service. And I had arranged to take 3 interpretations of a chapter in Corinthians, the King James Version, the NIV version, and from a book called The Message, which is modern language interpretation of the Bible. And I thought we will just go through this and we'll read each of the versions and we'll just talk about how that, brings out the message from the chapter. And this went very well, and they got into it. This is a King James environment, but it was a stretch for them to hear an NIV version, and then an even bigger stretch to hear the message. But it went well. They sort of absorbed that, and it felt like, okay, this was a good connection. As a matter of fact, there was a young couple up in the front, and they asked a question because this touched something they were wrestling with. He was in tune with the more traditional message, and he liked the King James Version. She liked going to another church that they had experienced where they had the praise music orientation and something more to the right or left, however you look at that. And so they were able to look at this and say, okay, it's not unusual to have this range of experience. So anyhow, the Sunday school class ended and it felt like a high note. And I'm getting ready. We have the beginning of the church service, and the song leader gets up, and it's this elderly gentleman. He must have been in his 80s at least. And he's kind of shaking a little, holding the hymnal, and he couldn't carry a song in a basket. I mean, in terms of musical talent, it wasn't there, but every piece of his heart was. And then it dawned on me, it's not about me. If I had charged in there with, hey, let's take and put this music in the machine, and this man would not have been able to serve in a way that was important to his life. And so that intervention, that higher perspective that was there to say, there's a larger view of what happens in our lives. But it's hidden. It's still behind that veil. And while the veil may be thinning, It's really meant there to enhance what it is for us to be here. Whoops. I thought I had a conclusion slide. Well, I guess that was it. For me, this question of experience is very important. And I've had now 6 years on the board and I guess 14 years as a member of IANDS and then 20 years since I heard my first near-death experience. And from an experiential point of view, I feel like I've had a near-death experience with pieces throughout my life. So I can look back and see how my life has been directed, whether it's birds, making sure I don't get to a spot too soon in life, whether it was the divorce that absolutely was a crushing point in my life but turned me around in some ways that opened me up and made is one of the best things that ever happened to me, but I can only look back and see the benefit of that. That this guidance, this thing that is there for us, to me, that's what makes it real to be human and to have the value of having this experience. And so there's about 10 or less minutes left, and I thought maybe if there are examples of that kind of thing that people here would like to share, I think others here would like to hear it, if that sounds okay. Or if you have a question, certainly. Come up here, I think it's easier.
I've had two experiences that were life-saving. One my mother, one my own, I guess. For time, I'll just tell on my own.
I'm going to stand next to you so you can be recorded.
Oh, okay. 2004, my mother was quite elderly. It was kind of the last year of her life. I was trying very hard at taking care of her. My brother came up to visit, and at the time, I had something called atrial fibrillation, which Pim knows well about. It was cured with electrophysiology later, so I don't have it anymore. But when you have that, your heart goes into fluttering, and blood can sort of condense, and it can be very dangerous. So I was taking a blood thinner called Coumadin. And Coumadin is also very dangerous because if your blood gets too thin, you can have a brain hemorrhage or God knows what. So I was taking this, I had been taking this now for, I don't know, a couple of years. And you're supposed to go and get a blood test about every week or two. And then the lab tells you there's something called an INR, which is basically how fast your blood is clotting. And it should be around 2 or 2.5. The higher the number is, the longer the time it's taking for your blood to clot. So if you have a very high number, it's dangerous. Anyway, my brother came in to visit my mother because she was very sick. And so I gave up the room I was sleeping in for him. And I went into a room that had been a childhood bedroom, and it had a mattress from the 14th century with a steel thing under it. And it was made out of God knows what material. It was really hard as a rock and with bumps. So we went Friday night to buy a mattress for me. And I went into this place with 1 million mattresses with 1 million different varieties. I didn't have a clue what I wanted. And they were closing at 9 o'clock. And I'm lying on this one, I'm lying on this one. There's too many choices. There's a book written about that. Too many choices. I finally said, okay, it's 1 minute to 9. I said, all right, I'll take this thing. And the guy said, well, okay, so we can, he promised we would have it delivered the next day, Saturday. I said, nah, I'm not so sure. But anyway, he said, I think I can do it. He arranged to do it. He said, here's the phone number of the delivery people. If it doesn't show up, you call them and it'll be delivered Saturday, next day. So next day comes, it wasn't delivered. And I was up on my hind legs about this. I was damned if I was not going to get this mattress. I mean, I was really pushy. And I called them and I read them the riot act. And they said, nothing we can do because the truck that was driving from Buffalo, New York to Springfield, Mass with your mattress on it broke down in the middle of the night. Sorry. It'll be here Monday. And I was really ticked off. Well, on Sunday, I was shaving and I started to see a little bruise on my here. And I sort of ignored it, but a couple of hours later it started to grow. It got this big. And a few hours later it was growing down my leg, this red thing under my skin. Getting kind of scary. I thought, geez, maybe it's a Coumadin. I called my cousin who said he had something like that where he had a bone that was fractured and blood was coming out of his bone. He said it's probably what it is. Anyway, I went to the emergency room. And they took an x-ray. They said there's no fracture. But by the way, your INR is 12. Well, that sort of means like I got water in my veins. And I said, well, and they said, so go home. And I said, well, what about a brain hemorrhage? And they said, well, just don't get into the accidents on the way home. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, okay? I went home and I, in a freaked out state, I called my cardiologist, and he actually did call back. He ordered some vitamin K right away, which anyway, it kind of slows, it competes with the binding sites for the coumadin, et cetera, et cetera. The next day, Monday, I went into my regular doctor, and he said they should have given you cold plasma to flush it out. But here's my point. My point is that I didn't have another lab test for a week or two. I had no idea that I had a problem. And if I had gone another week or so with blood that thin, there's a very decent chance I could have had a brain hemorrhage or God knows what. But because of this mattress, it was the bruise from the mattress that started this whole process. If that truck hadn't broken down, I would have had the mattress. I wouldn't have had the knowledge of the coumadin. I could have died. And I know, I've said all along, there's some kind of protective force involved in this. So call it an angel, call it whatever you want. And I just realized, in a certain sense, I had a near-death experience, but not the typical one.
We only have a minute, and I want to give my sort of theology here about near-death experiences. I really would like to shake that term. Now, I know for 30 years, it's been very important to focus on it, and it's given us a lot in terms of being able to get public attention and get focused on it. But to me, experience is a spectrum, and you can have transformative effects all the way from a mattress to birds, up through emerging with the light. And I don't believe that experiencers who come back and want to make it unique really intend that to create separation. Everyone has experiences that want to be heard. Everyone has something that needs to be shared. And I want to acknowledge you and the gift of your time to listen to this talk and how much that means. That is a gift you give every time you open up your attention to allow someone else to express their experiences. Thank you.